Welcome to the Work Positive Podcast with your host, executive coach, and culture architect, Dr. Joey Faucette. Discover strategies and tactics that work positive as Dr. Joey talks with industry leaders who create a positive work culture that attracts top talent and reduces team turnover. Discover how you can create a work positive culture that increases productivity and profits. Here's your host, Dr. Joey.
Hey, Work Positive Nation. Did anybody besides me experience a little extra anxiety during the pandemic? Anybody besides me? Raise your hand. Okay. Not if you're driving necessarily or walking the dog. Don't let that dog go. But anyway, yeah, me too, right? I think we all did. We found ourselves working from home and trying to figure out such amazing things as childcare because our kids couldn't go, right? They couldn't go anywhere. Bandwidth. What do you do if your spouse needs to do a Zoom call at the same time as you and you don't have enough bandwidth, right? I mean, it goes on and on and on. There are more exacerbating factors like loneliness and what have you. Well, my guest today is going to help you solve this anxiety at work issue, specifically how you can create a positive work culture in what Bob Johansson calls this office shock, right, that we're all experiencing right now. And I'm excited to introduce him to you. I actually met today's guest through Gary Ridge. So if you're not watching this on YouTube or on our website at workpositive.today, you've got to just take 10 seconds and go look at us because today's guest, Gary and I all have the same barber, Floyd from Mayberry. So we all have our perfection being revealed daily. Work Positive Nation, help me welcome to this episode of the Work Positive Podcast, Chester Elton. Chester, delighted to have you on the Work Positive Podcast.
And I'm delighted to be your guest. Thank you for inviting me. A privilege.
Oh, it's a real privilege. Chester and I decided we would get Gary Ridge a travel can of WD-40 for introducing us. That's how much fun we've already had before this podcast started. So, Anxiety at Work. That's the name of your latest book, right?
It is. We wrote it during the pandemic. I think there were probably more books written during the pandemic than any other time in human history because everybody had time, right?
Everybody was home. We had to do something.
Write that book that they always wanted to write. And interesting story behind how and why we wrote that book. Adrian and I, that was our 14th book that we'd written together. And, we were always Gostick and Elton, Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton. This book is the exception. It's Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton and Anthony Gostick, which is Adrian's son. And he was the one that really pushed us to say, look, you guys talk about, high performance cultures and leaders and teams. Do you ever talk about anxiety at work? And we said, oh, no. We don't talk about Bruno, right? Our generation is rub some dirt on it, turn that frown upside down, get back in the game. Yeah. So he said, I know that. He says, you got to understand though, my generation, and Anthony's a super smart millennial kid, all the definitions, digitally connected, super competent. He says, my generation, we start every conversation with how are you doing? And what we mean by that is, how are you managing your mental health? Mm-hmm. So we took a deep dive and sure enough, we had a lot to learn and we published it all in Anxiety at Work.
So what you're saying is we should have Anthony on this podcast too, right?
Wouldn't be a bad idea.
Thank you, Anthony. We appreciate you. And thanks, Chester, for listening. So in the midst of this anxiety in the workplace now, well, first of all, let's give a good definition of how you guys work through it in the book. What you heard Anthony saying about anxiety at work. What does that look like today, Chester?
Great question, Joey. Pre-pandemic, the numbers were like 18% of workers said they had some kind of anxiety disability, right? Which meant it kept you from doing your work. Now, everybody has a little bit of anxiety, right? And a little bit of anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing. Get your blood flowing, get you excited for, the podcast, the presentation, whatever it might be. Yeah. Anxiety disorder is where it is so persistent, the anxiousness, the worry about what might be, that it inhibits you from doing your job. So pre-pandemic, 18%, call it 1 in 5, right? Okay. When the pandemic hit, that jumped to 32%.
32.
That's a big jump. It's almost doubled, right? And then when you looked at workers in their 20s, it was 42%.
Ouch.
So now you're getting close to almost half. And, as you talk about retention and turnover, 50% of millennials and 75% of Gen Z said that they had quit a job due to mental health issues. So, the tricky thing about it, Joey, is if you had 20% of your people showing up with a broken leg or 42% showing up with a broken leg, it would be really obvious that there was something wrong.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
You broke your leg. I see by the cast, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's take away everybody's skateboard or whatever. The problem with anxiety is that it's that hidden ailment, right? And people that are anxious tend to be really good about hiding it. And so as leaders, we have to be much more in tune, much more empathetic, and much more observant to really solve that problem. So it was really interesting as we started to look at the data, the research, and then look at case studies of leaders and companies that handled it really well. How could we then take that data, those case studies, and give people the tools to create these high-performance workplaces that is everybody's goal, right?
Right. Well, especially when you think about those numbers, 1 to 5 to 1 to 3 to 1 to 2. I mean, that's a cataclysm. I mean, that's epidemic, right? It's a pandemic of anxiety in the workplace. So you mentioned these leaders. We're all trying to attract talent today, right? And we prefer to attract top talent if we can. What did those leaders do that we can do in our workplaces and Work Positive Nation to begin attracting top talent? And then we'll get to the team turnover issue in a moment. Right.
The organizations that attract really top talent and keep them are those that really treat the whole person. It's really interesting. We've got complex people coming to work to do complex work. And you can't. The one thing that the pandemic really blew up was the separation of personal life and work life, and you've heard that 1,000 times already. This idea that we've got to work around much more. In your introduction, you talked about, look, during the pandemic, who's watching my kids? Who's making sure they're doing Zoom school or whatever? And so now those that attract top talent really understand that you're hiring a whole person. And their story. And this is something that was very evident. Guys like Gary Ridge do very well, is they know their team, they know their people. And what I mean by that is I don't just know their resume, their capabilities, their background, their experience, where we're going to slot them in on the team. They know things like, where did you come from? How did you get here? What do you want to accomplish while you're here? And where do you want to be 3 to 5 years from now? So now I've got a picture. We've all got a story. Joey, you got a story, I got a story. And that story to us is important, if not even sacred. Ask me about it. And once I know you as a person, what you value, what's really important to you, even what are your passions and your hobbies. People that get to know me get to know right away that I'm a passionate New Jersey Devil hockey fan.
Oh, well.
Yeah, there you go. I grew up in Canada. Hockey's a big deal, and we've been a rotten hockey team for a long time. This year, Joey, we're really good.
We are
really good this year. This is the year,
I heard that
baby.
about last year, but anyway, this is the year.
Yeah, you didn't hear it about us last year. We were horrible last year. We've got 3 number 1 picks playing on our team, which tells you that you don't get the number 1 pick if you're doing really well. At any rate, but my point is this: is once you know things about people, there was a guy that we were working with, and I thought it was kind of interesting. He said, "Tell me a little bit about your family." He was obviously Asian, and I said, "Now, are you from Korea? What part of Asia are you from?" He goes, "Oh, Vietnam." I said, "Oh, isn't that interesting? So what generation are you?" He says, "Second generation." Oh, wow. My parents were on a boat that got picked up by the U.S. Navy during the evacuation of Vietnam. Well, all of a sudden, my perception of him and his family changed dramatically, right? Because I knew a little bit about his story. So long answer to a short question. The organizations that attract great talent, they go that extra mile and they say, okay, where'd you come from? What do you want to do while you're here? And those bits of information that make a person and not just a worker go a long way. Because the fact that I would even ask you that says a lot about the kind of company that I'm going to join. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. And of course, we as Southerners, we've got a leg up on this, a competitive advantage, because we've been meeting people and saying, hey, how you doing? Who's your mom and daddy? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
We've been asking that question for years and sitting around telling stories, listening to stories. So, Gary, excuse me, I looked at your head.
Yeah.
Chester, I'm sorry. So I'm thinking that this begins in the initial conversation, if you want to call it an interview process. What are some great ways of getting someone to talk about their story in that initial conversation?
Yeah, I think it just starts with those questions. Say, hey, I'd just like to get to know a little bit more about you. And by the way, one of the great ways to make it comfortable is tell them a little bit about you. Say, vulnerable. By the way, said, hey, I'm really excited to meet you. A few things about me before we get to you. Yep. Here's how long I've been working at the company. Here's why I love working here. Here's who my mama and daddy are.
As you and I did before this podcast started, we're talking about grandchildren, right?
Absolutely.
So we begin by getting to know each other. So I love the I'll go first approach, because they may think, oh well, he's just trying to find out something about me, right? No, I just really want to know you as a person, and so we begin to approach each other person to person. I particularly love that because Anthony's question that he and his generation use, how are you? Right? So when you ask, here's who I am, tell me a little bit about yourself, boy, that moves the conversation away from what are your strengths and weaknesses and the other questions that we usually ask, right?
Right.
The boring.
We talk a lot about you got to get past fine. How you doing? Fine.
Yeah, because 9 out of 10 fines are lies, right?
Well, yeah, 9 out of 10 people are not fine, right?
No, they're not. No, so
the old adage that be good to everybody. Everybody's having a tough day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, at the end of the day and the beginning of the day, Chester, we're all just trying to figure it out, right? And change is happening so quickly. The landscape's moving so fast underneath us. Who knows why you're sitting there having that first conversation with someone, right? During the Great Resignation, we saw tons and tons of those first conversations going on. So these top leaders were getting to know the people as people first. So let's move forward, Chester, and say, okay, we've learned their story. We found some compatibility, some alignment between their strengths and skills and passions and the company purpose. The team's met them. We think that they'll do well. What do we do going forward then to ensure that they don't join the Great Resignation or quiet quitting or whatever euphemism we want to use for disengaged people today? Yeah,
I'm a big fan of just regular check-ins, and one-on-one, and just calling up and say, hey, you got 5 minutes. I just want to talk to you about a couple of things. I think particularly with hybrid and remote workers, it's easy for them to feel disconnected and lost in the system. And those regular check-ins mean a lot. And here again, Joey, I think you got to know your team. Some people don't like regular check-ins, which is fine, right?
Why are you checking on me?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's this about? Like, if this, I got work, just text me. So the idea is know who needs that regular kind of attention, who kind of wants to be left alone. The point is be disciplined about it. Know your team. And, look, I'm a big fan of random acts of kindness. Every now and again, just, I don't know, drop something in the mail, whether it's flowers or candy or, I don't know, a Starbucks gift card, which you can, text to people now.
Travel size can of WD-40. I mean, something.
Travel size can. Why would you leave home without one?
Yeah, especially if your knee's hurting, right? You want to spray something in there.
Yeah. And so the point is the message is, I was thinking about you. I care about you. You're not forgotten. And, when it comes to mental health in particular, one of the most important messages you can send to your team is you're not alone. You're not alone.
Hmm.
And those regular little check-ins, just a little text here, a little note there. I'm actually a huge fan of handwritten notes.
Hmm.
And I know it's old school and people don't do it anymore, which makes it even more fun.
Stands out.
You get that fun little note that says, hey, I'll do this with my kids. Now, they prefer texts. I still do drop them a note every now and again. But I'll just text them and say, I was just counting my blessings this morning. I wanted to let you know that I was thinking about you. How lucky I am to be your dad. And I just love you. Have a great day. I mean, who doesn't want to get a note like that? Right? Who doesn't want to get it? I mean, stop being so kind and loving. Nobody does that.
Yeah, you're making it hard to leave working here by being so nice.
I just want to go for 10 cents a dollar more. So I think that is a great strategy is if you've got somebody that cares about you, you're more likely to stay. I mean, you just are.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about anxiety at work, Chester, in survey after survey, loneliness is showing up really high. Yep. I mean, if it's not the number one factor, it's certainly top 3. How do tactics like handwritten notes, regular check-ins, how does that combat that loneliness?
Well, it's one of the best tools you have because, people feel remembered. We really are social animals. Yeah. We just are. Mm-hmm. And creating rituals where you can get together and, our good friend Gary Ridge and I are disciples of Marshall Goldsmith, who's been a great mentor to both of us. Mm-hmm. And Marshall's got a wonderful little catchphrase that he uses. He says, hey, we're all going to meet for something, a drink after work or go for coffee. Look, if you can come, great. If not, don't worry about it. No obligation, no guilt. I'm going to extend the invitation. If you can make it, great. If you can't, don't worry about it. No obligation, no guilt. Because a lot of times, people that are remote or hybrid or they've got to go pick up their kids, they feel like, oh, if I'm not there, they're going to think less of me, or I'm not a team player,
or they're going to talk about me.
Right.
Yeah.
So the whole idea there is, look, we're going to do this stuff. And if you can be there, great. If not, it's fine. We'll catch up another time. Mm-hmm. We can catch up another time. The other thing that I love about leaders that combat loneliness in particular is, again, sharing your story and just saying, hey, I just want to talk with you a little bit. I know it's easy to feel like left out. My family's on vacation without me. And I got to tell you, I'm just lonely. So you got 5 minutes just to keep me company. I sure appreciate it. And let them know that, hey, this is a normal thing. It is a normal thing. Yeah. Don't worry about it.
Right. Well, somebody listening to this podcast just heard you say that, Chester. And if they aren't thinking about themselves, they're thinking about somebody else who would never admit to being lonely to someone else and being that vulnerable. How can you jump over that barrier to just be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I'm lonely too. My family's on vacation. I just want somebody to talk to.
Yeah. It's so interesting. We wrote a book before anxiety at work called Leading with Gratitude. If you ask me and Adrian, it would say, look, that's our favorite book. Our most important book is probably Anxiety at Work because it addresses such an important issue. And, these little expressions of gratitude, I think just go a long way. And, sharing your story and talking things through. And we have a wonderful podcast called Anxiety at Work. We just had a guest recently. He said, what are some of your mental health practices that help you? And she said something I just really appreciate. She says, put down the pencil where you compare yourself to everybody else. That creates a lot of loneliness. I should be doing more. Comparison is the enemy of happiness, I think. Be content that I am enough, I am enough. And I think that goes a long way. Well, say, look, it's so easy to compare ourselves to everybody. When we speak at conferences and whatnot, and we get into this, I say, it's so easy to compare yourself to others. Stop for a minute, look around the room, and understand that 99% of the world would trade places with anybody in this room in a heartbeat.
Yep.
In a heartbeat.
Yep.
Enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride.
Need a longer term perspective, don't we? Just to be able to see the bigger picture.
You're doing great. take the win.
That's right. That's right. Well, comparison leads to competition, and we never measure up to fictional characters in our mind, right? Because they've always got more. They're always more handsome. They're always got more money. They more ability. Blah blah blah. In fact, I had a text exchange with a friend this past week, and that's exactly what he was talking about. I'm working my butt off, but I'm just not doing as well as others, and so I'm depressed about it. So that loneliness factor is just really being able to identify as a human being with another human being. So it's not that we're having a conversation for the sake of discussing work. Those are important, right? But we're having a conversation just to relate to one another. How is that the pathway then, Chester, to peak performance?
So great question. All the research and studies that we looked at said, look, when people have a sense of belonging, when they've got a community behind them, when they believe that what they do matters, that they make a difference, and when they make a difference, it's noticed and celebrated, performance goes up. And you're hearing a lot of talk now about more empathetic leaders, right? Now, being a more empathetic leader doesn't mean, they're just so nice. This is the nicest person ever,
Yeah, maybe
my
nice,
job is to
but doesn't necessarily mean they're only nice.
Right. Some of the most empathetic leaders, some of the most compassionate leaders we ever studied. One was Alan Mulally, the guy that saved the Ford Motor Company. Okay. Another one was Ken Chenault, who led American Express to just ridiculous success. Mm-hmm. They were very empathetic, very compassionate leaders that led with gratitude and were incredibly demanding. And people loved them for it. So this idea that empathy means just being nice. No, empathy is expressed in a lot of different ways. And I think a lot of it is when you get into a culture where you collaborate, you co-create, you come in as a leader and say, look, I don't have all the answers, right? Old school is the leader always had all the answers. You better. Right? You better. Or why were you the leader? How did you get promoted? What do you mean you don't know everything? That's right. Where you come in and say, look, I don't have all the answers. Collectively, we can get there. Let's co-create. Let's not be in competition with each other. Let's be in competition with the competition. Let's worry about them. Yeah. Right. And so let's come together and figure out what's the best solution, what's the best product, what's the best way forward, what's the best strategy. Now, what happens there, Joey, is everybody's got ownership. And say, hey, I'm part of the solution. Am I going to buy in? Of course I'm going to buy in. Half those ideas were mine. I can't agree that this is what we're going to do and then not do it. It was my idea.
That's right.
So this idea of being the leader that brings people together to collaborate and co-create is very powerful. And I think is the expression of empathy. That's the expression of empathy is I'm going to invite you in. Let's do this together.
And at that point, I belong because I'm collaborating.
Exactly. So I'm part of the tribe, as Gary would say. Right? As Gary says, we're not just coworkers; we're tribe members. This is my family. This is my tribe. And would you ever desert your tribe? No, you would never do that. Right?
In fact, I'm going to work harder to bring my best self to work each day, and to be more vulnerable, authentic, and transparent, and the kinds of things that keep this tribe a tribe.
Exactly.
Chester Elton is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Chester, what's a great website that we can go to?
thecultureworks.com. You'll find all our great stuff there. Another thing that I would encourage you to do is follow me on LinkedIn. Every other Friday, we drop a gratitude journal where we bring in wonderful authors and just expressions, things that you can do to create that positive workplace, that workplace that's full of gratitude and fun and engagement and productivity. How do you get stuff done? So thecultureworks.com and follow us on LinkedIn.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. So if you're on the Peloton or walking the dog or something, that's all in the show notes. You can find his LinkedIn connection right there because we want to make it easy peasy for you. So what are some challenges that you're seeing in the workplace today to gaining peak performance with that kind of leadership style that cares for the person, that's vulnerable, transparent, authentic?
Yeah, I think the biggest concern right now is just uncertainty. We're just dealing with so much uncertainty, that we got through the pandemic and now there's the economics, and now banks are failing and people are getting laid off. And it's really hard for leaders and companies in general to deal with that. And so how do you do it? I think you just up your communication, just as much as you can communicate. And by the way, a lot of times you're going to say, look, I don't know. Here's what I do know.
Here's it's okay, isn't it, Chester, to say, I don't know. I mean,
absolutely.
It's transparent. We're back to being an authentic leader.
Yeah. And say, look, here's what I do know. Here's what we can control today. Let's have at it. Yeah. See, depression is worrying about the past, which we can't change. And we spend way too much time. Anxiety is worrying about the future. Again, a lot of things that we can't control, that we can't change. So as leaders, if we're as transparent as we can be and tell people as much as we know and keep them in the present and say, hey, look, let's make today a good day. And when tomorrow comes, we'll figure out tomorrow too.
Because it's not here yet, so we don't know what kind of challenges are going to present itself. I mean, did anybody know the Silicon Valley Bank was going to collapse until it collapsed? May have been some people, but it wasn't the most of us, right? So now that sends anxiety through all of our minds. What's going to happen with my company?
Yeah.
The communicative ability of leaders at that point is huge, Chester, just to speak into people's VUCA world, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, say, look, I'm like you. I got bills to pay. I got people that are depending on me. And let's figure it out as best we can. We'll work as hard as we can. And we'll control what we can control. And the stuff that I don't know, as soon as I do know, I'll tell you.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of us working together collaboratively, we can figure this out. And so instilling some sort of encouragement, confidence in the team. At that point.
Yeah, Adrian and I work for a great leader, Kent Murdoch, where the company where we met actually and started to write together. And he said, look, we got some big problems here. He says, now I can't solve them by myself. And I'm a pretty smart guy. He said, I'm a smart guy. Collectively, we could be Einstein. So let's figure this out. Let's figure it out together. And let's go.
I love it. Well, when you're speaking that kind of truth and encouragement into your team's hearts and minds and spirits, right? Only good things can come out of that, Chester.
Exactly. Yeah. We're always smarter together than we are. What's the old saying? I think it's an African proverb. It says, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together.
So now you've got in my mind the metaphor of the geese flying in a V formation, right? Headed south and exchanging positions, right? An oldie but a goodie, right?
Yeah.
Chester Elton, thecultureworks.com is the website you can go to. Tell us what we'll find when we get there, because you've written several books.
Yeah. So we've got, we do a lot of executive coaching. You can find out about our executive coaching. We've got a wonderful little consulting practice that we enjoy. You'll find all our books and soon to come courses, some online courses that you can take around culture, gratitude, and of course, anxiety at work, what we've been talking about today. Also, you'll find our links to our gratitude journal. And my co-author, Adrian Gostick, is a brilliant writer. He writes regularly for Forbes magazine. So you'll find all that stuff in one easy place, thecultureworks.com.
Thecultureworks.com. All right. And again, that's in the show notes if you can't get to your phone right now. There's always one question Work Positive Nation wants me to ask, and make sure I ask. Lots of questions they want me to ask, but one question in particular, Chester Elton, and that is, what's your one thing that Work Positive Nation can do starting today to create a positive workplace?
Yeah, and this one's a little self-reflection, and I think it'd be very helpful for the listeners. Wonderful. Ask yourself as a leader, am I being the leader that I want to be right now? In this moment, am I being the leader that I want to be right now? And what that does is that triggers, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as the leader that was really quick to point out everything that was going wrong and slow to point out what was going right? Do you want to be the leader that was always known as the smartest person in the room and no one else's opinion mattered? Or do you want to be known as the leader that developed other leaders? That leader that went out of their way to make sure that you were in the best place to succeed and that you were kind. What do you want your legacy to be? And I think that question am I being the leader that I want to be right now, will help you get there.
Yeah. Would I want to work for me?
Exactly. Another great question. Good for you.
That's a wonderful one thing.
By the way, Joey,
could do.
I would like to work for you, so I will answer that question for you.
Chester, I can't wait to work for you. When can I start? Or did we just start? That's amazing. Chester Elton, thecultureworks.com is his website. Go there and find out more of his incredible work. Now, Chester, there's a special guest that, we're kind of wrapping up here, but there's a special guest that you wanted to introduce before we said goodbye, right? Don't you have a friend there? Okay.
I do.
Yeah.
A little bit about me. I grew up in a ridiculously happy household. My father, John Dalton Elton, was the epitome of someone that led with gratitude. And he would always say, look, the world needs more carrots and less sticks. So let me introduce you to Garrett the Carrot. If you ever hire me to come speak at your conference, I will bring a whole bunch of Garrett the Carrots. We'll throw them all around the room, and he'll just cheer you up. He's delightful.
A whole lot more Garrett the Carrots and a whole lot more sticks. I love it. I absolutely love it.
You got it.
By the way, I'm placing my order for one for my granddaughter, right? Right. Okay.
I'll get it in the mail to you right away.
Okay. So if you're listening to this, you got to go on YouTube and check out the Work Positive channel, and you got to see Garrett. I'm particularly envious of Garrett's hair. I'm just saying he's got some great hair there, right? Yeah.
Kind of got that reggae thing going.
Yeah, That's right. Maybe I could get some implanted the way that Garrett is in that delightful green. Thanks so much. Chester Elton, thecultureworks.com is the website. Do yourself a favor, Work Positive Nation, and go there now. Chester, I've had a blast with you today, man, and I've learned a whole lot. Thank you so much.
It was a delight. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends who are HR and small business leaders so they can do one thing today to create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits. I'd like to give you a free Work Positive course just for listening. It's called Something to Talk About, and it's transformed the work conversations of so many people all over the world. Get your free copy when you go to workpositive.today/something to talk about, and you can start transforming your conversations today. Remember, it pays to work positive.